Hey folks, welcome to part 2 of our seed starting series. Now in part 1 we talked about how to get your indoor grow station set up and then how to get all your stuff together to start seeds. So I showed you a recipe on how to DIY your own seed starting mix and other tips and tricks, and then I also talked about containers and all of that good stuff. So in today's video, part 2, we are going to be talking about actually planting the seeds and how to do that successfully, and then how to raise those little seedlings successfully, which is one of the biggest problems a lot of new seed starters have. And then finally, we'll talk about how to transition them into your garden. It's the month of January, and so I am still planting cool season crops. Now, the key to cool season crops is succession planting. So because you're growing mostly leafy greens and root vegetables like radish, you want to keep them coming over and over again over the course of the cool season. And so you want to be able to harvest those radish, but you've got to have another batch coming along. Succession planting is really key, and I am planting seeds, I'd say, every couple of weeks or so. So today I'm going to be sowing some lettuce seedlings, but it's also time for me to plant some perennial flowers. In fact, I can plant perennial flowers any time of the year in my Northern California climate, but now, especially when the weather is not that hot, flowers tend to grow a lot better. And so about 10 to 12 weeks before they're ready to go in the garden, that's when you want to start your flower seeds. Now, there is one very key date that you need to know when it comes to starting seeds, especially seeds that need to go outside after your last frost. So yeah, your last frost date is an extremely important date. Now, over here in the Bay Area, Northern California, my last frost date is somewhere in the March timeframe. So you work backward from that date, and that's how you know when in advance you want to plant your seeds. So this here is forget-me-nots, and it says at the back of the packet that I need to plant the seeds inside about 8 weeks before my last frost date. And it also tells you whether you should cover it lightly. Some seeds need light to germinate, in which case you leave them exposed. And it often also tells you the depth that you need to plant your seedling. Now, there are 3 general groupings of dates that you want to think about in the context of your last frost. There's 10 to 12 weeks before your last frost, 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost, and then 2 to 4 weeks before your last frost. And the ones that you want to plant 10 to 12 weeks before your last frost are the plants that usually take a lot longer to grow. So things like herbs or teeny tiny perennial flowers, those usually take a long time to grow from that seedling stage to a size that they're ready to go out in your garden. 6 to 8 weeks, if you consider your summer vegetables, things like tomatoes and sweet peppers and eggplants, all of those are about 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost. And then finally, 2 to 4 weeks before your last frost are your fastest growing seeds. And those are things like your summer squash, beans, that kind of thing. So usually the smaller seeds take a long time and the bigger seeds grow a lot faster. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Another thing that I always advise people to do is learn how the particular plant, the flower, the vegetable grows in its native conditions. So if it's something like a flower that grows in a hot Mediterranean climate, it's not likely going to do as well in the very, very cold northern states. So you want to make sure that you're growing plants that are well adapted for your climate zone. And if you're growing plants that are not adapted for your climate zone, you should know that they either won't grow too well or that you need to be able to create the conditions that help them grow well. For example, if I want to grow tropical plants like bananas and dragon fruit, I need to make sure that I create that nice, moist, humid environment for them during their growing period. And then during the winter, I want to take them inside my sunroom to protect them from the frost. Okay, let's sow these seeds. Now, I've got this really cool 3-in-1 pop-up tray from Vego Garden that I'm going to be growing things in for the first time. And I really like the idea behind it. It's got these fairly small seed cells, so they're perfect for things like lettuce and flowers and onions, chives, that kind of thing. And they've got nice big holes at the bottom so that when the plant is grown to a size that you want to transplant it out, all you do is poke your finger in the back and it'll push the plug out with limited damage to the roots. And it's also got these slits on the side, and that is for air pruning and also for oxygen. So the roots grow really, really healthy. So I'm looking forward to growing my seeds in this. These actually come stackable, so you can get multiple of them with little stilts in between them and stack them. I've got just one. And it's also got this really cool dibbler. So you can see this little tube at the bottom here. And when you fill it up with soil, you just gently push down to the depth that you want it to be. I'm going to be planting lettuce seeds and flowers, so it'll be very, very gentle. And then through the hole, I can actually insert the seeds. So let's go ahead and do that. So the way that I fill up my trays is I actually fill them up and then I gently push down, not too hard. Remember that these are going to be tiny seeds, and so they need plenty of light, fluffy soil in which to germinate. So I just gently push it down with 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 4 fingers, whatever makes it go fastest. And then I refill it with soil. And that should be about right for them. So let's plant some seeds. And now I'm going to use my dibbler. I'm not going to push it hard, just ever so gently. Very, very gently, because a lot of these seeds need to be sowed very superficially. I've got some lettuce seeds here. This is a free seed mix that I got from MI Gardener. So I don't know what I'm going to be getting. I'm probably putting about 3 or 4 seeds in each one of them, but that's okay. Because I want to grow at least some of these to be head lettuce, I will thin out whatever is too clustered up. And I've got some purple peony poppy. Peony? How do you pronounce that? Peony or peony? And don't forget to label. I've actually written all the things in order over here so I know which row is which, and I'll be labeling it as soon as I'm done. Do not rely on your memory. You will forget, I promise. Got just a few seeds of each. You can see how tiny these seeds are. So I'm going to do a little pinch in each hole. Okay, all done. Gently take this up. And I love using a squirt bottle to wet my seeds because you don't want your freshly planted seeds to move around too much. Seeds, typically you want to plant them to about double the depth of the size of the seed. What happens is if you don't push them deep enough, when they pop out of the soil, they need that friction with the soil as the seed head comes up. And if there isn't enough friction, and this often happens actually with peppers, it will leave the seed on top of the 2 little leaves, and that's called helmet head. And very often the seed head does not come off and the plant just dies. So it needs the friction of the soil. So plant the seeds at least double the size of the seeds. I'm actually going to be using my sieve to do just a very, very light dusting of soil. All done, and I'm going to be putting in my grow tent on top of my heat mat for the seeds to germinate. Now, one of the reasons why I put that light dusting of dry soil on the top of the seeds is it helps to keep the surface dry. You can also do things like sprinkle some vermiculite, but the idea is if the surface of the soil is dry, there's less chance of fungal diseases and other pathogens really attacking the seedlings. So speaking of diseases and just healthy seedling management, let's talk about the things that you can run into. So let's go into my greenhouse here where we've already got some seedlings growing, and let's talk about some of the diseases that can affect our seedlings. I've got lots of seedlings growing here. Many of them are way overdue to go into the gardens. Got to get that going. But one of the biggest problems with young seedlings is the surface of the soil, if it remains moist like this, tends to develop fungal activity. And that is also exacerbated by fungus gnats. And you get this white fungus developing on the soil, which quickly spreads and it attacks the seedling and kills it. And that's called damping off disease. And that's probably the biggest problem that your seedlings will encounter. Now, there's a few ways of dealing with that. Number one, keep fungus gnats away. I talked about the yellow sticky traps. That is a preventative thing. You want to do that before you even get your seedlings in there. Those little fungus larvae which eat the roots and also the fungal disease that develops will be kept at bay. Now, the other thing is you want to keep the soil as dry as possible, so you water from the bottom. So lift up one of these cell trays and pour water in the bottom and then let it soak from the bottom. There's holes at the bottom and it will soak through. And after it's done soaking, maybe about an hour or so, you want to take and empty out your tray. You don't want it to be sitting in stagnant water indoors. Now, another thing that you will see sometimes quite often on your seedlings on the surface of the soil is a greenish algae. Now, while that won't necessarily kill your seedlings, I have found that it actually creates a kind of a sticky surface on top of the soil, and that prevents oxygen from being able to get absorbed properly into the soil, and it just results in a plant that's not terribly healthy. So those slits that I showed you on the sides of the seedling tray that I was using will really help with that. But in general, if you see algae, just kind of scrape it off with your finger. That's really the best that you can do. And again, watering from the bottom really helps keep that surface dry and algae won't develop. Now, as the weather starts to warm up, I actually bring my seedlings out for an hour or two during the day and I keep them outside. That makes a huge difference, you guys, both for algae as well as for fungal diseases. The sun is the best remedy possible. Nothing can compete with the sun as far as killing off those diseases and bringing balance to your soil. So if it's possible, even for an hour or two a day to bring your seedlings outside, please try and do that. It will make the biggest difference to the health of your seedlings. Okay, finally, let's talk about transitioning your seedlings outside. Now, you want to wait till they're a decent size. I'd say till they have at least 3 or 4 of their real leaves. Remember the first leaves, the cotyledons? Those leaves look very different than the true leaves. The true leaves are the second set of leaves and beyond that come after that. You want to wait till the seedling is a good size, maybe 4 to 6 inches tall, before you put it out in the garden, maybe even larger. The larger they are, I found, the more chance they have of surviving all of the various elements, including critters, etc., that are out in your garden. That's a huge difference between your carefully protected indoor environment and the great wild, wild west outside. And in order to acclimatize your seedlings, you need to start bringing them outside every day for a little bit. The first day you bring them out maybe for an hour, keep them in a shaded spot in your garden. The second day, maybe it's 2 hours in the same spot. The third day, you start to move it into a little bit more sunny location. And over the course of a week, you will get to a point of adding an hour or two every day that your seedling is now well suited to be outdoors. And only then you should consider planting it in the soil. And this is a really important step, because if you don't do that, if you just take your seedlings and leave them outside and maybe forget about them for a day, a lot of them won't even make it. I've had pepper seedlings that indoors, because it's so moist and humid, the leaves get really large and they're actually kind of frail and thin, and they get little bubbly spots on them. It's called plant edema. And when you bring them outside and the leaves are so delicate, oh my goodness, the pepper plants really, really struggle. So yeah, be kind to your plants. Transition them gently outside and they will reward you by growing really, really well once they go in the ground. Whew, that was a lot. I hope you learned something new, folks. And if you can leave a comment below and let me know if you learned something, I sure would appreciate it. And if you can also hit that like button, it would make me so happy. Now, if you haven't seen part 1, I will leave a link to it somewhere here. And if you want to know how to completely automate your indoor grow station, check out this video right here.